The air was dry, almost electric, as if the California hills held their breath under the relentless sun. On the outskirts of a town once vibrant, now scarred by fire, a lone farmer stood by the charred remains of his barn. The blackened earth crackled under his boots, a haunting reminder of the inferno that had swept through just weeks earlier. In the distance, a sleek electric car rolled to a stop, its reflection glinting against the scorched horizon. From its stepped a figure the farmer recognized immediately: Elon Musk, the man known for changing worlds, now walking toward him with a determined gaze. The farmer, Daniel Hayes, was a man molded by the land he worked on for decades. His broad shoulders bore the weight of a legacy passed down through generations, yet his eyes betrayed a quiet despair. Once surrounded by golden fields of wheat and orchards heavy with fruit, his farm was now an ashen wasteland. The acrid smell of burned wood lingered, a stubborn ghost of the wildfire that had ravaged his home. His clothes, though clean, were patched in places, signs of his resilience in the face of mounting hardships. Daniel had lived his entire life in this small Californian valley, a place that had once thrived on the bounty of its fertile soil. But the last 5 years had been unkind, with droughts and unpredictable weather turning the area into a tinderbox. Wildfires were no longer rare catastrophes but an annual terror. This year's blaze had been the worst yet, consuming not just land but lives, livelihoods, and hope. As Elon Musk approached, Daniel felt a swirl of emotions: curiosity, skepticism, and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months: intrigue. Musk's arrival seemed out of place against the backdrop of destruction, his crisp white shirt and polished shoes contrasting starkly with the soot-streaked earth. "Daniel Hayes?" Musk asked, his voice calm yet carrying a quiet authority. Daniel nodded, unsure of what to say. "I heard about your story," Musk continued, gesturing toward the scorched land. "And I believe there's a way to make sure this doesn't happen again." His words hung in the air, heavy with a promise that felt almost impossible to grasp. Daniel folded his arms across his chest, trying to read the billionaire's intent. "You're telling me you've got a plan to stop wildfires? That's a bold claim," he said, his voice tinged with both disbelief and a longing for something. Anything that could bring relief. Musk's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that spoke of a mind already racing with solutions. "This isn't just a plan," Musk said, gesturing to the valley. "It's a system that learns, anticipates, and acts. And it starts here, on your land." Daniel squinted at Musk, the sunlight bouncing off the Tesla parked behind him. The words hung in the air like the smoke that had choked the valley weeks ago. "Start here? Why my land?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying a blend of skepticism and exhaustion. Musk reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek tablet, its screen glowing faintly as he tapped a few buttons. "Your story, your loss. It's symbolic of what millions are facing, Daniel," he said, his tone measured. "We're developing a wildfire prevention system, an interconnected network of satellites, sensors, and artificial intelligence. A system that can predict and extinguish wildfires before they destroy lives and land. But we need to test it in real conditions, and your farm? Well, it's perfect for that." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't like being a symbol, and the promise of high-tech solutions felt like just another rich man's fantasy. But the glint in Musk's eye wasn't the arrogance Daniel had come to associate with wealthy outsiders. It was conviction. Musk continued, gesturing to the barren land. "We'll install heat sensors in vulnerable areas, drones equipped with fire suppression systems, and satellite data to monitor conditions in real time. If there's a spark, we'll know, and we'll stop it before it spreads." Daniel's mind flashed back to the inferno, the frantic evacuation, the hopelessness of watching flames consume his life's work. He shook his head. "It sounds impressive, but these fires don't care about promises. They move fast. Too fast." "That's the point," Musk countered. "This system moves faster. It's proactive, not reactive. And if we succeed here, we can roll it out globally." The weight of the offer pressed on Daniel. He'd spent his life trusting the soil beneath his feet, not satellites in the sky. But he also couldn't shake the image of his neighbors, displaced and grieving, or the barren horizon that used to be filled with life. "So what's the catch?" he asked, crossing his arms. Musk's smile whitened slightly. "No catch. Just a chance to be part of a solution that could change everything." The simplicity of the words unsettled Daniel. Part of him wanted to walk away, but the other, the part that still clung to hope, wanted to believe. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's see if your system's as good as you say it is." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a stark contrast to the silence that had hung over Daniel's farm since the fire. Trucks arrived carrying equipment Daniel couldn't name: gleaming towers, compact drones, and sensors no larger than his palm. Technicians in crisp uniforms moved with precision, mounting devices on poles and burying wires in the charred soil. Daniel stood at the edge of it all, a weathered observer in a world that felt foreign. Yet, as the project unfolded, doubts gnawed at him. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, especially not the promises of people whose lives were worlds apart from his own. Every night, he'd sit on his porch, watching the drones hum across the horizon, questioning the gamble he'd taken. Could technology truly understand the chaos of nature? Could it anticipate the fury of a wildfire? Inside, the emotional toll was heavier. The fire hadn't just burned his land. It had seared through his sense of identity. Farming wasn't just his livelihood, it was his legacy. The idea that satellites and sensors might replace the instincts and grit that had defined his life left him uneasy. He often found himself pacing the field at dusk, his boots stirring the soot as he struggled to reconcile hope with fear. Externally, the challenges were just as daunting. The locals were skeptical, their mistrust of outsiders fueling whispers about Daniel's decision. At the local diner, where he used to share meals and laughter, he now overheard conversations laden with doubt. He's letting them turn his farm into a science experiment, one voice murmured. Bet it'll fail like all the others. Each comment felt like another crack in the fragile confidence Daniel was trying to build. And then there were the tests. The first simulated fire, a controlled ignition, didn't go as planned. The system identified the blaze late, and the drones arrived seconds too slow to extinguish it. Daniel's heart sank as he watched Musk and his team analyze the data with calm urgency. It's part of the process, Musk assured him, his tone steady. But Daniel wasn't sure he could endure failure again, not after everything he'd already lost. As the weeks passed, the weight of the challenges threatened to break him. Daniel found himself standing alone in his field one night, the stars hidden behind a blanket of clouds. He clenched his fists, the words spilling out in a rare moment of vulnerability. What if this doesn't work? What if it's all for nothing? But as the wind carried his voice into the night, Daniel realized the answer wasn't going to come from the stars or the soil. It would come from his willingness to keep going, to trust, even if it felt like the hardest thing in the world. The turning point came subtly, like the first stirrings of dawn after a long, dark night. It began with adjustments. Musk's team analyzed every failure, recalibrating sensors, fine-tuning algorithms, and teaching the drones to respond faster. Daniel, initially content to observe, found himself drawn into the process. He started asking questions about the mechanics of the drones, the science behind the sensors, and the logic of the system's predictions. One evening, as the team prepared for another test, Musk handed Daniel a tablet. "You've got a good eye for the land," Musk said. "Help us refine this." The gesture surprised Daniel. It wasn't just a tool, it was an invitation. Taking a seat at the edge of the control station, he studied the interface. It displayed a live map of his farm, overlaid with temperature readings and wind patterns. The data felt abstract at first, but as Daniel stared at it, he began to recognize familiar rhythms. The way the wind shifted near the southern ridge, or how heat pockets lingered in the lowlands. Slowly, the technology started to make sense, not as a replacement for his instincts, but as an extension of them. The next test brought a breakthrough. The system detected the controlled fire within seconds, and the drones launched with a precision that left Daniel breathless. They arrived just as the flames began to lick at the grass, dousing the area with a targeted mist. As the last ember fizzled out, cheers erupted from the team. Daniel didn't cheer. He just exhaled, relief washing over him. For the first time, the idea of hope didn't feel fragile. But the journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days when equipment failed, or when the unpredictable forces of nature tested the system's limits. Each failure weighed on Daniel, reopening the scars of the past. Yet he found himself leaning into the challenge, working side by side with Musk's team to find solutions. The farm became a living lab, where innovation met the raw, untamed elements of nature. Through it all, Daniel grew. He learned to see the land through a different lens, blending his knowledge of the soil with the technology that now defined it. He stopped seeing Musk as an outsider and began to appreciate his relentless drive. Late one night, over coffee in the makeshift control room, Musk admitted, "This isn't just about fires. It's about proving we can protect what matters. And that starts with people like you." Daniel nodded, understanding now that the fight wasn't just against the flames, but against the doubt that they could ever be stopped. Each test, each tweak, each small victory brought him closer to believing that change, real change, was possible. The valley had always been quiet at night, but on this evening, the silence felt foreboding. A dry wind swept through the hills, rustling the brittle grass like a whispered warning. Daniel stood on his porch, scanning the horizon. His phone buzzed. A notification from the system. The alert was clear. Multiple hotspots detected in the northern ridge, a dangerous combination of heat and wind threatening to spark a blaze. The team mobilized instantly. Technicians rushed to their stations, the hum of drones filling the air like an army preparing for battle. Daniel grabbed his tablet and joined Musk in the control room, the tension palpable. "This isn't a drill," Musk said, his voice calm but urgent. "We have a chance to stop this before it spreads." On the screen, the system mapped the growing danger in real time. The drones hovered near the hotspots, equipped with their fire suppression payloads. But the conditions were worse than anticipated. The wind was erratic, spreading heat across the dry brush faster than anyone expected. Daniel's stomach churned as he watched the data. He'd seen this before, the moment when a spark became an inferno. "This isn't working fast enough," a technician muttered. Daniel could see the strain on everyone's faces. Musk leaned forward, his eyes locked on the screen. "We need eyes on the ground," Musk said. "Someone who knows the land." Before Daniel could think, he spoke. "I'll go." The room went still. Musk hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Take the radio. Guide the drones." Minutes later, Daniel was in his old truck, bouncing over the rugged terrain toward the ridge. The night air smelled of impending danger, hot and sharp, the prelude to a wildfire. As he approached the area, he could see it. The faint glow of flames licking at the edges of the brush. Standing on the ridge, Daniel radioed back to the team, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "There's a cluster of dry brush near the gully. Target there first." The drones responded instantly, releasing a precise mist over the area he directed. The flames sputtered but didn't die. Daniel moved closer, guiding the drones in real time, pointing out hidden patches of fire the sensors hadn't picked up. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last ember fizzled out. The ridge was silent again, the air heavy with smoke but free of destruction. Daniel dropped to his knees, the weight of the moment crashing over him. He'd done it, not alone, but as part of something larger, something that worked. Back in the control room, cheers erupted. Musk's voice came through the radio. "You just proved it, Daniel. This system works." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He stood on the ridge, staring out over the valley. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever: peace. The following morning, the valley woke to a rare and welcome stillness. The sun rose over the ridges, casting light on the blackened remnants of what could have been a devastating wildfire. Instead, the land bore only faint scars, areas of brush dampened and charred but contained. For the first time, the system had triumphed, not in theory, but in reality. Daniel stood at the edge of his field, the early light catching the edges of the drones still hovering in their stations. He was exhausted, his body aching from the previous night's ordeal, but his mind was alive with thoughts. The land looked different now, not just because it had been spared, but because it felt like it had been given a second chance. The people in town had heard about what happened. Word spread quickly, and later that day, a few of them drove out to the farm. Daniel greeted them with his usual reserved demeanor, unsure how they'd react. "Heard you took on the fire," one of them said, an older man who'd once been Daniel's harshest critic. "Kept it from spreading to my property. Guess I owe you my thanks." Daniel nodded, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just his effort, after all. It was the system, the technology, and the collective determination to make it work. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt the beginnings of something he hadn't known he missed: respect. Back in the control room, Musk and his team were already discussing improvements. "We've got the data from last night," Musk said, scrolling through a detailed report. "It'll make the system even better for the next time." He turned to Daniel, his expression a mix of pride and curiosity. "What do you think? You've seen the land like this for decades. Does it feel right?" Daniel thought for a moment, then nodded. "It feels like we've got a fighting chance now." Over the next weeks, the system became a part of daily life on the farm. The drones patrolled quietly, the sensors gathered data, and the software adapted with each new reading. Daniel found himself explaining the system to curious neighbors, his once cautious voice now carrying a hint of conviction. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was part of something larger, a network that stretched far beyond his valley. For the first time in years, the seasons felt predictable again, the land resilient instead of fragile. And as Daniel worked under the warm sun, surrounded by the hum of technology and the promise of renewal, he realized he had gained something even greater than what he'd lost: hope. Months passed, and Daniel's farm began to heal. The first shoots of new life emerged from the blackened soil, stubborn blades of grass pushing through ash, trees showing faint signs of regrowth. The system had proven itself, not just in preventing disaster, but in giving Daniel and his community a reason to believe that the cycle of destruction could be broken. One evening, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The hum of the drones patrolling the distant ridges had become a comforting sound, a reminder that the land was no longer defenseless. The sky was clear, the stars bright, and uninterrupted by smoke or haze. It was a sight he hadn't appreciated in years. Musk arrived that night, stepping out of his car and joining Daniel on the porch without ceremony. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional chirp of crickets. Finally, Musk spoke. "You've done good work here, Daniel. Better than I imagined." Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't think I'd see this place bounce back," he admitted. "But now, I don't know, feels like there's a future here again." Musk turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "This isn't just about the farm, you know. What we've done here, what you've done, shows that we can push back against what's been taking so much from us. Fires, disasters, all of it. It starts small, but it matters." Daniel nodded, staring out at the moonlit fields. He thought of the years he'd spent fighting to keep his farm alive, the losses he'd endured, and the unexpected journey that had brought him to this point. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I used to think this land was all I had. But maybe it's not just about holding on to what's yours. Maybe it's about sharing it, finding ways to protect it for everyone." Musk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave Daniel a faint smile and raised his cup of coffee in a silent toast. As the night deepened, Daniel reflected on how far he'd come. The fire hadn't just destroyed. It had forced him to grow, to adapt, to trust in something he couldn't fully understand. The land was still scarred, but it wasn't lifeless. Neither was he. And as the stars watched over the valley, Daniel felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to face it.